We are on webinar number 3, and I'm excited to introduce our presenter, Mike Witt. So based out of Lavington, BC, Mike has worked in the feed industry after finishing his time in university. He has served the beef and dairy sector throughout the central interior of BC for more than 15 years. And then over the last several years, he has been farming forages, corn, and cereal crops while continuing to serve producers with forage seed and consulting services as the owner of Witt Precision Ag. Mike is a professional agrologist, a certified crop advisor, and a regional director of the BC Forage Council. So with that, I will pass over the reins and we'll let Mike share his screen and start his presentation for us this evening.
Okay, let's see if this will share screen. I think we're going.
Yeah, looks great.
Okay, perfect. Well, that was a good introduction. Oh, why isn't it advancing slides for me here? Oh, there we go. Okay, Sri did a great job of introducing what I do. I'm located near Vernon, so I'm definitely used to dry land conditions. Some of the land that we farm is irrigated, but some isn't, and I hope to use some of that knowledge and pictures from my own operation throughout this evening. My education was in Idaho and Saskatchewan, and as Serena mentioned, I'm a professional agrologist and a crop advisor. So this presentation, I'm really going to focus on hay production, and I've broke it down into 2 major parts: general forage management for drought, and how plants handle it, and benefits and disadvantages that come about from that. And then we'll go through specific species and how they respond and how they would perform in your region. So right off the bat, drought impacts on forage. These are kind of the negatives here. Of course, it reduces yield, and if it's abused during the time that it's stressed, it can negatively impact stand longevity. It also impacts the plant's ability to handle threats such as pests. The picture on the left there is alfalfa weevil damage, and quite often the worst situations we'll have with that will be on our drier soils and our drier years. It'll also impact micronutrient availability, and that picture on the right is a boron deficient plant. And something else to be aware of that's a negative impact of drought is that it can cause the forage to accumulate nitrates to the point where they can be an issue to the livestock's feed ration. So if there's concern around that from manure application or nutrient management in another way, it's best to test the feed to make sure there's not going to be a problem. Things that it does help, however, are counterintuitively, quite often drought can actually increase feed quality. The plant has less time to build cell wall fiber and generally less height, so you end up with a more digestible feed. Some grasses, they'll actually cure off while standing in dry conditions and maintain quality late into the season, even though they'll look dry. If you're to test them for the quality parameters, they come out pretty good. Alfalfa and other legumes, not so much. The leaves tend to fall off. And then, of course, with the drier conditions do make harvest go easier. As we found out this year, it wasn't a lot of fun. This is raking some stuff that got rained on a few times. And so it goes a lot better when it's dry enough to make hay. So the plants themselves, they've got kind of 2 main ways to handle dry conditions. They can either handle it by avoidance, which is early growth to take advantage of snowmelt, or dormancy, or a combination of these. By going dormant, they'll just shut down, regrow when moisture arrives. Alfalfa is a good example of a plant that'll do this very well. Alternatively, they can have tolerance. We can have specific species-specific ability in here, such as the rooting depth and structure. Quite often, plants have been selected through through the breeding programs. There's also C4 plants, which grow differently. They have a different way to handle the photosynthesis process that reduces the amount of water loss through their stomata. Unfortunately, C4 plants, they need a lot of heat to perform properly. These are crops like corn, sorghum, Sudan grass, teff grass. Those would be the main forages. So up in your region, they're not going to perform that well. They really need temperatures in the 30s consistently to perform. Even in the Okanagan here, we're sometimes challenged to have enough heat to get the yields that we'd like out of the true C4 plants. So what kind of strategies, just basic general strategies you could tackle? We could use the strategies from the previous presentations. I think there's a lot of really good information there to help build up your soil's ability to have resilience there. We can maintain a higher cut height. This one's quite critical, 3 to 4 inches of height to protect the crown of those plants. This is what I was referring to earlier, where if we take it too low and don't allow that plant to store any energy in the crown, it'll affect the longevity of that. And if the dry conditions persist, that plant could actually die off. Also, weed control. The weeds are using up the moisture on you as well, so really want to get them out of there as much as we can, and nutrient management, to make sure we don't have any deficiencies in there that are limiting it more so than moisture is. So when I start to talk about the species, I really prefer working with blends, especially for variable terrain. We'll get more into that later. The other really important thing is to know what your end use is, and whether it's horse hay or premium dairy hay, or if you're a cow-calf producer, whether you're trying to put weight on the animals or trying to just make feed for overwintering. And also note that there's pretty big differences between varieties within the species as well. So with respect to alfalfa-grass blends, typically they'll give you a higher yield. This research data is almost 20 years old now that Ag Canada did. There was 3 sites. I believe 2 of them were irrigated at the time, and we saw a higher yield of between 9 and 12% as compared to a straight alfalfa stand or a straight grass stand. And we get a higher yield in the year of seeding. It also extends the stand life. The diversity of species allows it to survive in wetter spots or winter-killed spots to help make up in case you lose one species out of those areas. And we can have agronomic benefits, such as the nutrient transfer of nitrogen to the grass, as long as there's about 60% alfalfa in the blend. And when used as part of a crop rotation, it can be quite effective. In the actual hay production portion, we do have benefits of easier dry down and better leaf retention as compared to a straight alfalfa stand. And as compared to a straight grass stand, we have a wider harvest window as the alfalfa's later maturity and ability to hold quality definitely benefits. If you're a silage producer, alfalfa can be a difficult crop to ensile on its own. Its ability to buffer pH is quite high because of its low sugar values. So having some grass in there can help fermentation within the silage bunker. Nutritionally, having grass in there increases the fiber digestibility and intake of the whole ration. The alfalfa adds some protein, and already mentioned, maintains quality in case of a delayed first harvest, such as this year. Hopefully not quite as late as this year. So altogether, they go together quite well. Now I'll move on to specific species. We'll start off with alfalfa. I didn't mention a whole lot here. It is the highest yielding and persistent legume option. Deep rooted to access deep moisture. It does have the ability to go dormant and come back when moisture arrives. For example, on some of our irrigated ground, if we don't get water on it, it'll just sit there, and then a month later, if we get water put on, it'll bounce right back, and we'll get another harvest out of it. It does require higher pH soils and does have high nutrient demands in order to persist, mainly potassium and phosphorus, as well as it does use sulfur and boron, especially if you're in sandier soils. Now, alfalfa has a broad genetic pool from very winter hardy dormant varieties right to non-dormant that they grow down in California. So we have to make sure that we get the right varieties for our region. And what we'll grow here under irrigation could be a lot different than what works best up there, where the winters are a little bit harder. So we have to make sure that we're able to use adapted varieties rather than just what's available. I went to wheatgrass next because that's the first one that comes to mind when we're talking about dry soils, right? It's a native. A lot of wheatgrasses are natives throughout the prairie region, throughout the southern interior. There's many species. Only a few that we use agronomically for hay production. Well, I'll touch on those individually. It's adapted to very dry conditions, down to 8-inch rainfall zones, and all soil types. Generally, it establishes quite easily and quickly, and is widely used for almost 100 years for all sorts of uses, from range, pasture, reclamation, and hay crops. Crested wheatgrass is the most well known. It's a long-lived bunch grass, generally upright growth, excellent early spring growth, but poorer regrowth. It's good in mixtures with alfalfa, but only for a single cut. Quality declines rapidly relative to some of the other species we'll talk about later. Wheatgrass can be grazed a little bit harder, and therefore we don't have to worry as much about stubble height on wheatgrass stands when we're cutting them for hay. This is probably the only one that I'd say we could cut it a little bit lower if needed for tonnage. Within crested wheatgrass, there's two primary types. There's the fairway type and the standard type, which is Kirk. Fairway is more persistent in the darker soils. Shorter plant overall, a little bit less yield. Whereas Kirk is a taller plant, a standard type, more drought tolerant and productive. If you were to look at it on a more of a prairie basis, Kirk would be what you'd find in the southern prairies. Fairway would be up north and into the Peace Country. So we can grow both of these in BC. It really depends on the needs and the soil type. This wheatgrass I really like, intermediate wheatgrass or pubescence, another form of it. Moderately sod forming, upright growth. We don't see this one in a lot of seed blends because it has quite a large seed size, and it requires higher seeding rates to get it to establish. It has excellent early spring growth, good regrowth of a large root mass, quite hardy and tolerant. The reason I really like it is it's good in mixtures with alfalfa. Its late maturity matches up really well, and the yield is really strong on it. It moderate tolerance to salinity, does not tolerate poor drainage or flooding, but it can be a really good fit in an alfalfa mix. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Bromegrass. It's has a really wide adaptation, and it's commonly grown on a lot of farms. It's less drought tolerant than wheatgrass, but I'd say a little bit more so than as we keep going through the list here. There's a number of types. There's smooth bromegrass, which has tall upright growth. It can be aggressively sod forming, and it can regrow from its rhizomes. Mostly it has spring growth, can go semi-dormant with heat. You don't want to have too much in a mix because it can outcompete legumes and other bunch grasses. Straight stands usually respond to nitrogen quite well. They can become sod bound over time. Generally, because of its upright growth, it's a really good hay species, and I like having it in mixtures where there can be some traffic because its ability to fill in holes, or if you have fields with a pocket gopher problem, it can fill in some of those holes too. Meadow brome is the next most common bromegrass. It has better regrowth than smooth. Regrows from the tiller bases, so it's critical that this one's cut at the higher stubble height of 3 to 4 inches. Lots of basal leaves, so it can be hard. Less so now with many producers having disc mowers, but with sickle mowers, there was a lot to cut through at the bottom of the plant. Well suited to pasture, mixes with alfalfa, multiple cuts. The seed's quite large and has little awns on it, so you really should have agitators in the drill if there's a large amount of meadow brome in the mix, because it can bridge up quite badly and start causing problems with the seeding. Over the last few years, actually one of my professors from the University of Saskatchewan developed these hybrid brome grasses, and it's where they cross meadow with smooth. Yield is similar to smooth, but a little bit less aggressive. And there's been some different back crosses in this now, where there's meadow crossed with smooth, crossed back with meadow, or opposite. A number of them have been commercialized. Great feed quality, great performance. There's been a lot of research done on this in the last 15 years or so. My experience with them down here is they can be a little bit slow to establish, so you don't want to expect too much out of them the first year, but once they get going, they perform quite well. A new brome grass we're looking at a little bit is Alaskan brome grass. It's actually a native to some parts of BC, I believe, although most of the cultivars are from overseas now. We found it has quick establishment and good production and hardiness, quite late maturity, and maintains its quality quite well into the fall, even after a couple of frosts. So this is one we're going to continue to watch. We have it in a few places here, and we'll see how it does. So here's a picture from a bit of a plot site on one of my own farms. Now this was managed without a lot of inputs, and this site actually had a little bit of excess moisture this spring with all the rain we had. But then after first cut of hay, the rain just stopped. We only had about an inch of precipitation from the end of June up until this last week. There is some sub-irrigation here, but you can see a little bit of the differences between the three brome grasses that I have in here. With the meadow brome, you can see it's laying down a little bit. It has quite fine leaves, and but all three of them, you can see they really haven't gone dormant with the lack of moisture. They're still there, and they're still photosynthesizing and producing some production, just waiting for that rainfall to get them going. So I'm sure many producers up there have grown Timothy. I would consider it a good example of drought avoidance. In the Forage Council's Highway 16 trials, it's always been one of the highest yielding grass species. It's well suited for short growing seasons and cold winters, but fall management is important for its longevity. We would consider it a little bit lower quality feed, but there's still demand in hay markets, especially with horse producers. Most of its tonnage is in the first cut, although some of the new varieties do have improved second cut regrowth. Timothy also has a pretty broad gene pool, in that there's about 20 days maturity difference between an early maturity and a late maturity. That may change somewhat as you go north. I don't entirely know how much the day length will affect it. It probably would tighten that up compared to how they perform here. I mentioned it needs a little bit different fall management. That's because Timothy stores energy in a corm. It's kind of like a bulb at the base of its roots, or at the base of the stem, just above the roots. So that's where it stores all of its energy to get through the winter. And first cut should be allowed to reach heading. At that time, it will be filling that corm up with sugars. It's really important that we cut it high if we want to have any regrowth. And it doesn't like to be stressed in fall. It really needs a chance to restore the energy back into that corm. So it's best if you can not cut it or not handle it for the first 6 weeks or so before first killing frost. After killing frost, it's not really going to try to regrow, so then you can take a harvest off of it at that point. Generally, there's a good response to fall fertilizer, P and K, and spring nitrogen. So here back to my same plot. We've got the Bromegrasses on the right and Timothy on the left. So you can see that the Timothy really went dormant in this heat. There's really not a second cutting there. But first cut was phenomenal. There was a lot of tons there. So I'll talk about orchardgrass, most popular grass by far in southern BC. There's a number of varieties available out there. Agronomically, it can have variable winter hardiness, and that's quite variety specific. Some varieties are bred for the West Coast, Lower Mainland, or coastal Oregon, Washington. They're not going to be as winter hardy in the interior of BC. We need to really move towards varieties that are bred for more of that prairie climate, to know that they're going to make it. It also has a wide range of maturity. It can be up to 2 weeks between early and late varieties. It's not flood tolerant, but it does have really good regrowth with moisture. If you're going to mix this with alfalfa seed, you really need to have one of the late maturity varieties, because it will lose nutrition quite quickly after it heads out, and it doesn't really maintain color that well after it's mature. For the maximum regrowth, it should be cut right at boot stage, although that can be tricky with the weather patterns. Oh, there's an example. This is irrigated, of course, but excellent regrowth with moisture, and we're really happy with it. So kind of I'll call it its partner is tall fescue, and traditionally it's been less popular because it has a little bit lower winter hardiness and some quality attributes that have made it not really catch on. Agronomics are typically it's higher yielding than orchardgrass and many of the other species as well, like Bromegrass or Wheatgrass. Pretty close to Timothy overall. In the Forage Council trials, we didn't see as much of a difference. I don't entirely know why. It could have been the cultivars that were in that trial. I like it because it's deeper rooting than the orchardgrass. It has a little bit better root structure for drier conditions. Now, I mentioned it wasn't as popular. Part of this is because it had a perceived poor palatability, and that was due to the rough leaf edges. And many of the older varieties are quite rough, and you can tell when you grab the leaves if you run your finger along it. It'll be, yeah, you'll notice it. In the last 10 years or so, there's been a number of new varieties released that they call soft leaf tall fescue, and it has improved quality with lower lignin and lower fiber, and of course they got rid of that rough leaf edge, so the palatability problem has gone away. I think the yield is a little bit lower on some of these, but they're working to get that in line with the older rough leaf varieties. But certainly, if they eat it, that's a lot better. The vast majority, I'm pretty sure all of the tall fescue varieties marketed in BC are endophyte free. That's something they use for extreme drought tolerance in the southern states, and we don't need to go there. So another picture from my little plot here shows the orchardgrass and the tall fescue, and you can see the tall fescue has maintained its quality into this fall a lot better than orchardgrass. These photos were just taken here in the last couple days, so it's a nice green color, and it'll stay like that even after a few frosts. So it's quite popular for stockpile grazing on fields after they've been harvested for hay for the year. I'll touch briefly on another fescue, Meadow Fescue. This is an interesting crop in that it was kind of forgotten about for a number of years, and it's come up a lot lately, mainly by dairy producers. It's related to tall fescue, and it has excellent winter hardiness, suited to a wide range of soils, tolerates the wet spots quite well, lower overall yield than the tall fescue, but it makes that up in significantly better forage quality. This is one of the highest quality forage grasses that we can grow. I've mentioned reed canary as well, because it's all over the place. Extremely flood tolerant. That's really its home. It doesn't work that well in dry conditions. Most of the native ones, the palatability is not great. Improved varieties have low alkaloids for better intakes. But the seed's been really expensive lately, so we don't see this getting seeded a lot. Perennial ryegrass is another, I'd say, not suitable for dryland production, but I mention it because it comes up in a lot of seed guides as well. It is also another very high quality grass forage, short-lived, easily winter kills, but it needs moisture. If you don't have 15 inches plus during the growing season, it's not going to do as well. Related to that is this has been back crossed with fescues and created some festoliums, and they're really high quality as well, but not as suitable for dry conditions, or their winter hardiness is a little bit suspect as well.